Hey, do you feel fatigued or have unexplained weight gain? Have you wondered if your thyroid levels may be out of whack? On this episode, I bring on a thyroid hormone expert. She explains the common thyroid hormones TSH, T3, T4, reverse T3, and a forgotten hormone T2. We also discuss how the thyroid antibodies can cause damage to your thyroid gland. And we discuss where to get the tests that you need to get a full picture of your thyroid. This is a really important podcast if you're interested in thyroid, so make sure to check it out. Would you like to get thicker, fuller, and stronger hair? Then make sure to check out fullyvital.com. The team has come up with 4 different ways to stimulate your hair follicles at the same time to give you thicker and fuller hair in 75 days or less. So make sure to check out fullyvital.com for better, thicker, fuller hair, and also use the code anti-aging-hacks to get 15% off your order. Are you enjoying the shows on this channel? Then please make sure to hit the subscribe button down below so you can get notified when we release new episodes. Our goal on this channel is to help you look and feel younger and slow down and reverse your aging so you can live your best life. If that's you, then make sure to hit subscribe down below so you can get notified when we release new episodes. With that said, let's get on with the show. Hello and welcome back to the Anti-Aging Hacks podcast. Today, my guest is Dr. Amy Hornaman, the thyroid fixer, who's the host of the top-rated podcast in medicine and alternative health called The Thyroid Fixer, with listeners around the globe. She's the founder of the Institute for Thyroid and Hormone Optimization, an organization with transformational, proven approaches to address thyroid dysfunction and support people in returning to full health. After her own experience of insufferable symptoms, misdiagnoses, and improper treatment, Dr. Amy set out to help others who she knew were going through the same set of frustrations and who were on the same medical roller coaster. Dr. Amy also created the Fixer supplement line, and ultimately, she's a woman on a mission to optimize thyroid patients around the world and give them their lives back. With that said, Dr. Amy, welcome to the Anti-Aging Hacks podcast.
Oh, Faraz, it's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So you were competing in fitness and figure competitions early on, and that led you into getting to health and wellness. Tell us that story, please.
It did. So way back in the day, I competed in fitness, figure. I did fitness modeling as well. And during that time, I would follow that really strict diet where it was a large focus on protein, but we would be pretty restrictive, going to the gym twice a day. It was very, very clean foods for a long time, usually 12 to 16 week preparation. And I would do that over and over again, and my body would respond to it. I knew how my body would respond as well. There was this one particular show that I was getting ready for. It was a bigger one. It was the Mr. Pittsburgh, which is a larger show, and now it's a pro show. And the scale was going up instead of down. And really, biologically, that doesn't even make sense. When you look at, even if you don't believe in calories in, calories out, if you look at the quality of food that I was doing, plus my energy expenditure, the scale should not have been increasing by any way, shape, or form. So I did what we all do. I went to the computer at the time, those big gateway computers, and I'm on the internet researching, and everything I kept coming up with was thyroid related. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to go to my doctor, ask for a thyroid panel. And I did that. And to this day, I would love to go back and see what they actually tested. I guarantee you they didn't do the full thyroid panel, but they told me I was normal. You're normal. Everything's fine. Go on your way. Well, I didn't accept that after doctor number 1. So I kept going. And doctor number 2, doctor number 3, 4, 5, 6, all told me I was normal. You're fine. You're just getting older. Now, mind you, I was in my 20s. One of them told me to eat less and exercise more, which was pretty much impossible to do with my show prep. And I had hit a point of depression, frustration. I mean, it was kind of the ultimate low. I remember sitting in my car after the 6th doctor told me that there was absolutely no reason why you should be 25 pounds heavier than what you were a month ago. Sitting in my car, I had my head on the steering wheel, crying, basically praying that I could get a diagnosis, praying that there was something wrong. That way there would be a label to explain what was happening in my body, because my body was basically just rebelling against me. And yes, there was the weight gain that, of course, I was focused on. And there was also the hair loss. So weight gain and hair loss are the two biggies that hit women's self-esteem like a punch in the face. And that's what we tend to really focus on over and over again during the day. It's like, why am I gaining weight? Why is my hair falling out? Why am I gaining weight? Why is my hair falling out? I didn't even care that I was tired. Like that didn't even bother, constipated, tired. That didn't bother me. But the fact that I was 25 pounds plus heavier and I was losing my hair, that really was detrimental to my own self-esteem and well-being. Finally, I went to a doctor that was functional, actually integrative at the time. We didn't even use the term functional back then, but he definitely practiced functionally like I do now. And ultimately, he became my mentor because he saved my life. He did all the tests. We went over supplementation. We went over nutrition. And my nutrition was on point, but it really came down to actually looking at doing all the right testing and implementing proper thyroid treatment, because I did have hypothyroidism and not one single doctor caught it until I saw an open-minded, integrative, functional practitioner that looked at me as a whole person and said, wait a minute, your body shouldn't be doing this. If you're telling me that you're eating this way and you're taking care of yourself this way, you should not be gaining weight. You should not be losing your hair. Let's look at everything. Let's look at thyroid. Let's look at hormones. Let's look at ferritin, how much protein you're eating. Let's look at all of it in one big, beautiful picture and put all these pieces together. So he ended up saving my life. And that is what catapulted me into this entire line of work that I've been doing for 27 years, because I went through my own frustration. And I remember thinking at the time too, I can't be the only one this is happening to. I'm in a large major city and just got misdiagnosed 6 times by top doctors, metabolic specialists, right? And that's what led me here to really help others.
Okay, so you found a mentor that helped you. Did you have to go back to school to learn some of the basics of what you were going to be doing now?
Oh, yeah, I totally changed careers. So I went back, I got my master's, I got my doctorate degree, I got my functional medicine training. So I was in school for a long time, but it's totally worth it and then I trained under him as well. So everything that I do now is what my mentor was doing with me 20 some years ago.
So you quit fitness modeling and the glamorous life to go to school for 7 years.
I did.
Okay.
I did. I threw in some powerlifting too, because I figured you didn't even have to diet down for that. You just had to be strong and be a badass. But other than that, yeah, my focus was on school and building my practice. And I would work with individuals who wanted to compete a little bit here and there. But after I really changed over to being a thyroid and hormone specialist, that's all I do now is just work with the thyroid and hormones.
Okay, fantastic. I've got a lot of questions for you around thyroid, but I'll make them quick. Before we start, will you please explain to the listeners why the thyroid hormone and the thyroid gland is so important for us?
Definitely. So the thyroid is the master gland. That's what we have to keep in mind when we're looking at or thinking of any symptom that we have, from, like I mentioned, weight gain, hair loss, fatigue, constipation, anxiety, depression, insomnia, joint pain, muscle pain, migraines. All of those go back to the thyroid. And because that is the master gland, it controls every aspect of our body, every gland, every organ, every tissue. The thyroid has an impact on it because the thyroid produces 2 thyroid hormones. It produces T4 and T3. And there's a couple other thyroid hormones in the mix too. There's T1 and T2 that we'll get to. And those hormones literally control every system of your body. So that's what regulates our body temperature. It regulates our metabolism. It regulates the hair growth cycle. It regulates our ATP production at the mitochondrial level for energy. It has an effect on every single cell in the body. So if you don't go back to the thyroid to really look at that when you're dealing with a bunch of symptoms, you're missing the big picture. You're going to end up band-aiding the symptoms, which we see in conventional medicine often. You're going to band-aid those symptoms with an anti-anxiety, an antidepressant drug, a sleeping pill. A lot of my patients get misdiagnosed with ADD and ADHD, and they get a medication for that as well. So you see all these Band-Aid medications instead of going and finding out what is causing all of those symptoms in the first place.
Okay, super quick question. it appears to me that women struggle with hypothyroidism or thyroid disorders more than men. Is that true?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
And the reason is, number one, with hypothyroidism, 95% is an autoimmune condition. It's Hashimoto's.
Mhm.
So even if you're sitting there going, well, wait a minute, I was diagnosed with hypothyroidism, but nobody told me it was Hashimoto's. It probably is. We're going to test your antibodies, your TPO and TJ antibodies to see, because 95% is Hashimoto's. Now, when we're looking at autoimmune conditions, one of the big triggers of autoimmune, besides big hormonal fluctuations like pregnancy and perimenopause, one of the big triggers of autoimmune conditions is having low testosterone. Now, men and women can both have low T. We know that. But if we just look at the in general picture, in general, men have more testosterone than women. So as a woman, when ours drops down low and we don't have enough for a protection against autoimmune, that autoimmune switch flips on into the on position. So we have this situation of a predisposition for autoimmune. We might have a low testosterone situation. We might have different stressors or hormonal fluctuations come into the picture, even though they might be natural stressors like pregnancy. Those come into the picture and then they flip that switch. So what you'll hear often is a woman say, I was going along just fine. And after my second child, or after I went into perimenopause or menopause, or after a major life change, it all went to hell. And that's when all the symptoms started appearing. And that makes sense because that's that autoimmune switch turning to the on position.
Very interesting. I'd never heard that before. So thank you for explaining why women have thyroid problems more than men. Let's talk about the actual hormones real quick so we can get into more detail. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned, or there's T3 and T4 that we know, most common people know to be the major hormones associated with thyroid. Then there's TSH, the doctor's test, and then there's reverse T3. So can you just explain those four and their significance?
Absolutely. So we'll start with the big one. The most common one is TSH, like you mentioned, the doctor's test. That's what you're definitely going to get tested if you ask for a full thyroid panel. But here's the thing. TSH is thyroid stimulating hormone. It's not a thyroid hormone. It's a pituitary hormone. So it's released by your pituitary gland. And I like using analogies to get people to understand. It's kind of like a sensor, so your pituitary is just feeling things out and it's saying, does this person have enough thyroid hormone in their body to do the job that needs to be done? If there's not enough thyroid hormone, TSH is going to go up. So this is one of the only tests where high means low. As that TSH increases, you are becoming more and more low thyroid function. You're becoming more hypo because it's screaming at the thyroid. It's poking the thyroid and then it starts really raising its voice and getting pissed off at the thyroid, basically saying, come on, you have to wake up and do your job, produce more thyroid hormone. So TSH is a feeler. It's a poker. It's an agitator to the thyroid gland to produce more hormone. Then we move on to the actual thyroid hormones, T3 and T4, which are measurable. And these are these are testable, but you have to ask for it because, like I said, if you go in and you say, hey, doc, can I get a full thyroid panel done? You're going to get TSH. If you're lucky, you'll get free T4. You're going to have to ask for free T3. I like looking at the free versions of these two hormones because that's what is available to be taken up by the cell. Now, when we're talking about T4 and T3, we have to differentiate. T4 is inactive. T3 is active. T4 has to go through a conversion, a change to become T3 in order to actually fit on the receptor site of the cell. So when we're looking at every single cell in your body, every single cell, like I said earlier, every organ, every tissue, every gland, every cell in your body has a receptor site on it for T3, not T4, for T3. So you can have all the T4 in the world. If it's not converting properly over to T3, you're not going to feel good. You're done. And this is why we look at reverse T3. This is why it's so vital to look at reverse T3. This is why you can't accept the answer from your doctor, which 90% of people get. We only look at reverse T3 in a clinical setting. Now, what do they mean by that? Reverse T3 is built into our body as a survival mechanism. We want that ability to make reverse T3 because if you are in a clinical setting, meaning the ICU, the ER, you've just been in an accident, you've been traumatized, you have a major injury, and your body is trying to heal. At that particular time, you want reverse T3 high because when the body is trying to heal, we want all energy and all resources to go to healing. You don't have to be burning body fat. You don't have to feel good. You don't even have to be happy. You just need to lay there and live and survive and heal. And that's reverse T3 as a protective mechanism in our body during those times of crises, trauma, injury. Where we don't want it elevated and putting us in this protective mode is when we're walking around trying to live life, when we're trying to work and raise the kids and go here and go there and get a good workout in and do all the things that we're doing on a daily basis. We don't want reverse T3 elevated because then that's putting our body in that protective mode when it doesn't have to be. And that gives us an indicator that you're not converting that T4 over to T3 properly. So that's why you have to test every single hormone to get that full picture of what's going on with your thyroid.
Mm-hmm. What I love about the way you explain this is it's so easy for the layperson to understand what's going on with this incredibly complicated organ system and hormone system in our body. So thank you for doing that. I wanted to ask, how does the T4? So first of all, there's T4 being released by the thyroid gland. I believe I learned from you that there's an 80-20 percentage of the T4, T3 combination that's being released. So why is the thyroid gland releasing so little T3? And how does the conversion, what are the requirements for the conversion to happen to go to T3 versus reverse T3?
In a perfect situation, in a perfectly healthy body, someone that does not have a thyroid problem, we can see that 80% of T4, which is kind of like your savings account, right? You don't want all your money in a checking account because then you're just going to spend. It's going to be gone. You want to be able to pull from your savings. So T4 is like the savings account. T3 is like the checking account. You want to be able to pull from it. In a perfect situation, there's enough money in the savings account that we can just pull from it and put in the checking, pull from it, put in the checking, and it all works out just fine. In a hypothyroid patient or even someone that has, there's so many different factors that come into play, heavy metals, chronic mold, Epstein-Barr virus, hormone dysregulation. There's all of these things that can come into play to raise reverse T3. When we're in that kind of scenario, then we have to say, we can't just rely on that 80% T4 being produced by the thyroid gland to convert properly, because that conversion process is like running 10 Tough Mudders. There's so much that can get in the way. If you're insulin resistant, if you're estrogen dominant, if your ferritin is low, if your magnesium, zinc, selenium, iodine are low, that's going to raise reverse T3. Like I mentioned earlier, Epstein-Barr virus, heavy metals, mold toxicity. There's so many different things that can come in and really interfere with that conversion. That's why we can't rely on that savings account all the time, especially in someone with hypothyroidism or Hashimoto's.
Okay. I got a couple more questions about hypothyroidism, but before we go there, what about hyperthyroidism? Is that just too much money in the checking account and it's just going crazy in your body?
It is. It's also usually hyperthyroidism. It's more rare. And that is also mainly caused by an autoimmune condition. So we call that Graves' disease. And that's when the thyroid gland is just overproducing both hormones, overproducing T4, overproducing T3. And what we'll see in that scenario, and this is very important, especially for your listeners that may have been told that they are hyper and they're sitting there going, wait, I don't feel hyper. I'm not like all of a sudden losing weight or anything. It's very common for conventional medicine to call a person hyperthyroid when their TSH goes low. And that's completely inaccurate. You cannot rely on TSH. If you are on thyroid medication of any kind, that TSH most likely will drop down, as most of the time we want it to. I like to see TSH below a 2. I'm on T3 only, so my TSH is completely suppressed. If you showed just my TSH levels to a conventional doctor, they would freak out. They would absolutely say that I am hyperthyroid, and I'm not, because we have to look at every single marker, and then we have to look at the individual person. In a true hyper state, that TSH will be low, free T3 and free T4 will be elevated and usually flagged high in that range. We'll see some TSI markers for Graves' disease. That's the antibodies for Graves' disease. We might also see Hashimoto's coincide. So you could have antibodies for both Graves and Hashi, and that person will feel hyper. And that is the biggest thing. You have to be asked by whatever practitioner you're working with these 4 most important words. How do you feel? Because if no one is asking you how you feel and they're treating you like a lab value and they're just treating you based on what they see on your labs, you're going to be mistreated. If you truly feel hyper, you're I call it icky and sticky. You're jittery and you're anxious and you're losing weight. You can't sleep and you're sweating all the time. And you look at your Apple Watch and your heart rate's through the roof and you got palpitations going on. Okay, you might be hyperthyroid, but unless you can combine all of those factors that I just mentioned, chances are you're not.
I got you. Thanks for that explanation. What is the percentage, let's say, of the people that have thyroid conditions totally? Is it a 20% hyperthyroidism and 80% hypo? How would you think?
That's a great question. I never actually looked up the stats for that. If I went by what I see in my practice, it would be something like 99% hypo, 1% hyper. Oh, wow. But in the real world, I don't normally see hyperthyroidism until someone destroys their thyroid gland. So until the doctor says, hey, you know what, you're hyper, we're going to take out your thyroid gland, or we're going to radioactive iodine your thyroid gland. Well, then naturally, once you do that once hyperthyroid person now drops into the hypo state. So now they have no hormone production for thyroid. We took out or destroyed the thyroid gland, which is the main conversion gland. So that T4 to T3 conversion happens in the thyroid, peripheral tissues, gut, and liver. So now we've taken out one of the main areas of conversion. That's when I'll see people come to me and say, oh my gosh, my doctor put me on this thyroid medication. It's usually T4 only. And I just feel horrible. I had my thyroid gland taken out 6 months ago, a year ago, 5 years ago, and I feel like garbage and nobody's listening. So that's when I see the hyper patients, is after they've already gone to the hypo side.
So in the case when there's hyper, there's too much going on, doctors will actually take out the thyroid gland completely?
Yes. This is a very, very common practice. Wow. And in some instances, it is warranted because that swing occurs. So I was working with my best friend's mom, and she was doing that huge pendulum swing. She would go hyper, and we'd have her on methimazole and be trying to calm down that thyroid. And she started getting the bulging eyes, the thyroid eye disease. And then she would swing over to the other side, and she would have no thyroid hormone. We have to put her on T4 and T3 again. We have to take her off the methimazole. She would gain weight. She would be constipated. She'd be depressed. And then all of a sudden back to the other side. So when you have that big pendulum swing, sometimes it is warranted. Just remove the thyroid gland and let's start it in the beginning. Let's just start from scratch. But when you start from scratch, you better be working with an expert, or else you're going to get put on T4 only. And that is not going to work whatsoever, because that's standard of care in conventional medicine. Like, let's take out the thyroid gland that produced T4 and T3, and let's just give T4 only, cross our fingers, wish on a rainbow that it converts over to T3. It just doesn't happen that way. So if you do have to go the route of removal or radioactive iodine, I prefer the surgery over RAI. If you do have to go that route, then just make sure you're working with somebody knowledgeable afterwards that can get you out of that hypo state that you're going to fall into.
So when you get into hypo, conventional medicine gives you a T4 hormone only. Is that levothyroxine or Synthroid?
Bingo. Exactly. Okay. And like we just talked about, it's so much for the body to convert that it doesn't even make sense to give T4 only. Yes, that is what is learned in med school. My personal opinion is they don't give enough training on the thyroid. I mean, thyroid gland is the master gland, and it's controlling literally everything, including your heart, like even AFib and tachycardia. I mean, we can all come back to a thyroid condition. Mm-hmm. So it just doesn't make sense to have an hour or two of thyroid training and to tell these docs, oh, yeah, just test TSH. If it's high, throw the person some T4 medication, they'll be fine. Really? Have you walked in the shoes of a thyroid patient? Have you walked in those shoes of being hypothyroid and being absolutely miserable? I mean, there are some people that think that they are going to die because they feel so horrible. So to give one medication only and call it a day and tell the patient, oh, you'll be okay. You'll be fine. We'll just increase your T4 some more. No, that's borderline malpractice. I'm completely against it because I rarely see T4 only work.
By the way, your passion's coming through loud and clear. So thank you. Thank you for being passionate about it, because somebody has to be. Okay, so if T4 by itself is not good enough, it's not going to work. Is it a combination of T4, T3, or just T3 that you can give to the individual? How do you go about that?
Depends on the person. It's very, very individualized. And it really comes down to, again, looking at what the person is on now, looking at their labs and looking at their symptoms and really putting that whole picture together. So there might be a patient that I have that we see from the past, God willing, they got a random reverse T3 done at some point in time. And I see, oh, wait, back here in 2021, you were on T4 only and your reverse T3 was an 18. Okay, that tells me that you tend to push your T4 over to reverse T3. You don't convert very well. Now we're going to dig and find out what's going on that's pushing up that reverse T3. Do you have insulin resistance? Do you have estrogen dominance? Do you have low ferritin? Are you not taking iodine? All of those things. But at the end of the day, that's also going to determine what thyroid treatment we use. So that person might need a little more T3 than T4, so we can change that ratio up. Instead of mimicking the thyroid gland at an 80-20 ratio, maybe we do something more like a 60-40 or a 50-50 or a 40-60, and we weigh the T3 a little bit heavier than the T4 because we still have some in savings. We're just putting more in checking because that person tends to use it better that way. And when we have that T3 on board, they're feeling better. And that's the big question. How do you feel? Are you feeling better when we change your dose? Are you feeling better when we change your medication, when we change that ratio? And if we can continue down that pathway and still put the labs together with how the person feels, ultimately you get what that person is supposed to be on, and it works perfectly. For myself, I am T3 only. This is not a goal. I want to say this because I get this question all the time. Well, why do we even use T4 if it's inactive, it doesn't convert? Because ultimately you want something in your savings account. I cannot keep anything in my savings account when we're talking about thyroid, because if you give me T4, I am such a horrible converter, even after checking all of those boxes and taking care of all the deficiencies. I am such a horrible converter, I will convert that to reverse T3. So if you give me even a tiny little bit of T4, I will experience hypo symptoms even before it shows on my labs. Even before that reverse T3 goes up, I will show hypo symptoms. So sometimes it's a trial and error as to if someone has to be T3 only. And then other times we can go by the reverse T3 to determine what to do with their thyroid hormone treatment. It's all personalized though. It's there's no one size fits all whatsoever.
Yeah, that's the beauty of this personalized medicine and the frontier where we're going. Now, if you have to figure out what percentage of T4, T3 to give to somebody, I assume there's no drug or pharmaceutical that's readily available. So you've got to compound it in a pharmacy or some kind of thing like that.
Oh no, we have, just the regular pick it up at your Rite Aid pharmacy medications as well. So we have Armour thyroid and NP thyroid. That's natural desiccated thyroid. So that has all the thyroid hormones in it, T1, 2, 3, and 4. It has more 80%, roughly 80% T4, 20% T3 with a little bit of the T2 sprinkled in. Then we have the separated T4 and T3 medications. So we have under the T4, Levo, Synthroid, Tirosint. Under the T3, the generic is liothyronine, brand name is Cytomel. And people call those synthetic medications. I call them, I've renamed them biosynth because I think it sounds better. When we hear synthetic, we tend to stay away from, I don't want something that's synthetic. Mm-hmm. These two medications or multiple medications under the same category, T4, T3, they have their place. They are biologically identical to what's being made in your body. And some people just do better on them. If it wasn't for liothyronine, I would be 50 pounds heavier, wouldn't be here with you today. My hair would be falling out. I'd be too tired to work. So because that is what my body needs in that right combination. Now we can take NDT and we can pair up some T3 with it. We can throw in some liothyronine to the natural desiccated thyroid. So that's where those combinations are just wide. I mean, it's wide open of what we can do to personalize it. Compounded, I have to say, in all my years of doing this, I have never found someone truly optimized on compounded thyroid medication. And there might be somebody out there that's going, what are you talking about? I am good. Fine. That's awesome. You're probably not coming to me because you're rocking life right now. But the people that come to me that are on compounded medication, they are always in this hypo state. And I would love to figure out the why. I just can't. I don't know, because this is congruent with every compounding pharmacy across the United States. I was working with a prescriber one time, swore up and down that her compounding pharmacy in California was awesome. They're awesome. They're awesome. They're the best ever. Well, every patient we put on compounded medication for thyroid tanked, went totally hypo, felt like absolute garbage. We had to quickly pull them off that and put them on to the NDT or the liothyronine or the Synthroid. We had to change them over. So I'm not a huge fan of compounded thyroid medication. If it works for you and you're listening, awesome. That's totally good. Fine. But my patients, I normally don't use it that much because I don't want to roll that dice.
Yeah, totally. Okay. I want to get to T2 in just a second, but I want to ask you about hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's, the prevalence of Hashimoto's. So what we've discovered or uncovered so far is that 99% of all the thyroid cases that you see are hypothyroidism. And what of that 99% is Hashimoto's versus non-Hashimoto's hypothyroidism?
Right. So the stats that we know, about 90% of, if you take all the hypothyroid cases, 90% of those are going to be autoimmune. Only about, and some people argue 5%, 5 to 10% are truly hypo, meaning the thyroid gland just crapped the bed on its own. So whether it was radiation, chemotherapy, maybe a beta blocker, birth control is a big one known to tank the thyroid gland, eating disorders, over exercising, under eating, starvation diets, chronic stress. Those are the things that directly affect the thyroid gland, where the thyroid gland goes, this is just too much. And it just stops producing thyroid hormone. But most of the time, it's going to be autoimmune. It's going to be your immune system seeing the thyroid gland as a bad guy, as an invader, and going out and sending its soldiers out to beat up the thyroid gland and destroy it, because it's just confused. Any autoimmune condition in your body, whether it's Hashimoto's, rheumatoid arthritis, it's your own immune system that is really confused, and it starts attacking a good part of your body that you really don't want it to attack, be it your joints, your thyroid gland, whatever it is. So what we have to do is to calm that down. We want, again, analogies like crazy with me, soldiers. Those antibodies that you have are soldiers that are confused. And we want to calm down. We want to keep those soldiers in their barracks. And we want to reduce the amount of soldiers that you have. So if we can bring those soldiers from 1,000 down to 200, okay, that's less destruction that's happening. And then if we can keep them contained and just let them know that everything is okay and the thyroid doesn't need to be attacked today, then you get an improvement. We stop the destruction of the thyroid gland, number one, and then the thyroid gland can start producing, even if it's half its size, it can still produce some thyroid hormones, and then we can replace the thyroid hormones that are no longer being properly made with treatment. So it's kind of just an overall treatment protocol where we want to calm down that autoimmune attack and replace thyroid hormone at the same time.
Okay. And then going back to what you said earlier, the best way to understand or detect Hashimoto's or autoimmune conditions in your body is to get the full thyroid panel. And that has the 2 antibody tests on it included. And just listening to you, I got mine a couple of years ago, and I'm going to do it again soon. And I'm going to send it to you just for good measure, to make sure everything's still good. But what Dr. Amy has, and many women, we sell hair wellness products, as you know, many women have reached out to me to ask where to get the full test done. And luckily, I've sent them to a few different resources, but now I know that Dr. Amy uses one that's on her website. And so I'll just send people there. What's your website, by the way, where people can go?
So my website is dramyhornaman.com. And at the very top, we do have a banner that says order your own lab test, because a lot of times people will ask their doctor to order free T3 or reverse T3, and they will be told, just like we talked about, like, oh, I only do that in a clinical setting. Well, you can go out and get your own. Now, the only problem, that is knowledge, right? You want the knowledge in front of you to know what direction to go. The only problem that I have with docs that won't test something, how are they going to then treat you? So they say no to testing. Right. Even if you go out and you get your own panel done and you're like, ooh, yeah, these don't look so good, do they? I need to do something about it. Who are you going to approach? Because your doctor just didn't even want to look at your full thyroid panel. Didn't even care what was really going on inside your body. Blew you off, told you I don't test that. So yes, getting your own tests, great for personal knowledge, 100%. But then you got to do something about it.
Yeah. The 3 takeaways I have from this conversation so far is, 1, you got to test. If you're not testing the full panel, you don't know what you're talking about. Right. Number 2, you got to know your symptoms. Write them down. A lot of us ignore how we feel all day long sometimes. So write them down, or at least know what you're going through. And then 3, work with somebody who's an absolute expert in this area, that's done it before, that's seen hundreds of patients at least, so they can help guide you in the right direction, as opposed to, like you said, a practitioner that's refusing to even test, which means they have no clinical background in actually release or helping with that symptom or condition. Okay, I really want to move to T2, but the last question I have for you with antibodies is, we understand with T3, T4, if those are less, your body's not producing enough, there's ways to get exogenous T3, T4, like NDTs and some of the drugs pharmaceuticals you talked about. But what if the antibodies are high? Is there a natural way, or even a pharmaceutical way, to bring these antibodies down to 0?
Absolutely. So number 1, we have low dose naltrexone, LDN. And LDN so naltrexone as a drug, use it like 50 to 100 milligrams. That's used for opioid addiction, sometimes alcoholism, to block those receptors so you don't get the high, you don't get that feeling from it. Now, what researchers have found through the years is that a low dose version of that, and I'm talking 1.5 to 4.5 milligrams as opposed to 50 to 100, that low dose naltrexone is very anti-inflammatory, and it works on pretty much all autoimmune conditions to really lower that cytokine storm, that inflammation, that autoimmune attack. So we can see a reduction in thyroid antibodies when we use low dose naltrexone. Now, a lot of times people don't want to go on another medication, even though it's compounded, even though it's a very low dose form of naltrexone. A lot of people are like, I don't want to throw in one more med. Or sometimes people just don't do very well on LDN. I've had a couple patients report back that they experience almost like a flat affect. It's almost kind of like a bad antidepressant. Some people will feel more emotional. Sometimes it will affect sleep and produce insomnia. I had one patient that was just flat out allergic, had an anaphylactic reaction with her lips. So, and LDN can increase cortisol too. So if you already have an adrenal issue, you might want to consider not adding an LDN. Now, the beauty of supplementation and the natural route is that black cumin seed oil can lower antibodies. So I'm actually probably about 3 to 4 weeks out from coming out with a product called Hashimoto's Fixer, which is 500 milligrams of black cumin seed oil, specifically because I've run into so many patients that can't do LDN. So we absolutely can use black cumin seed oil as well. And that has been proven in the literature to lower antibodies.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing. Well, I take that on the regular anyway, so I'll just buy yours when it comes out. Okay, so let's talk about T1 and T2, which you alluded to earlier. What are these hormones? When I was discussing coming on or having you on my show and we talked about T2, I didn't even know what it was. And so I had to look it up. But so please tell the audience, what is T1 and T2 hormones and why are they important?
So fascinating. So when you really start diving into the literature, which I did about 15 years ago, T1 is inactive. It is one of the thyroid hormones. We just kind of push that aside. It's produced in very minuscule amounts and it really has no biological effect on the body. Then we start to look at T2. Now, like I mentioned, it's in very small amounts when we look at natural desiccated thyroid medication. If we look at, let's say, a 60 milligram tablet of Armour Thyroid, you might get 6 to 8 micrograms of T2 in that NDT medication. When studies have been done on T2, and let me just start off by saying there is not a test. There's no assay for T2. You can't go to Quest or LabCorp and ask for it. We can measure it when we're doing studies. I do hope to one day see a normal, like free T2 come out so we can test T4, T3, T2. But as of right now, there's no way to test for it because there's not a drug for it. So we all know that any lab test that you have, there better be a pharmaceutical, be it good or bad, there better be a pharmaceutical slap on it. So there's no drug for T2, even though it naturally occurs in NDT. When we look at the T2 studies, they're just absolutely fascinating. So number one, it increases your basal metabolic rate. That is the rate of body fat that you are burning, literally just sitting here with no exercise being done, no movement. So your basal metabolic rate increases and your mitochondrial function improves because it's increasing ATP at the mitochondrial level. T2 is doing this all without thyromimetic effects. So what this means is if you take T2 in supplemental form, you will increase your basal metabolic rate. You'll notice a decrease in fat. You'll notice an increase in energy. By the way, I have had some patients report back, or just not even patients, just customers that have been using Thyroid Fixer with T2 report back that their hair is growing back and they're seeing the baby hairs coming back. Wow. Because it's improving mitochondrial function through the body, all without changing the thyroid lab values. We don't necessarily want those lab values to change because of what I mentioned earlier about your doctor freaking out and saying, oh my gosh, you're hyperthyroid now. It's not going to push your TSH down. It's not going to falsely elevate your T3 levels. It's all going to be working at the mitochondrial level, at the cell level to improve things rather than at the actual thyroid level and changing those lab values. So yes, you can take it if you don't have a thyroid problem and you want to just kind of improve mitochondrial function and improve the rate of fat burning. If you're struggling with weight, if you're struggling with energy, you can take it if you have a thyroid problem and you're already on thyroid medication, especially if you're only on T4, because that's going to improve your symptoms without affecting your labs. It also has no cardiovascular effects. So while we can take T3, and I'll tell you a little story with bodybuilding in a second. While we can take T3, some people are sensitive to it. Some people will report back that they're like, oh, my heart's racing and I just can't take these palpitations and it just doesn't feel right. And they get that icky and sticky feeling that I talked about earlier with T3. T2 doesn't do this. So my bodybuilding story is, as we know, I personally, I don't know what you think, Faraz, but I think that bodybuilders are the OG of biohacking because they started experimenting on themselves like 20 some years ago. And just now we're hearing about peptides and all this stuff. They've been using that forever. Mm-hmm. So I heard a bodybuilder talk, and he's a trainer to the pros. And it was really interesting. This is years and years ago. And that started piquing my interest in T2 about 15 years ago. And he said, when I'm training my mainly women for the stage, the IFBB pros, fitness figure, I don't let them use T3 because let's face it, T3 is abused in the bodybuilding circles as a fat loss drug because it increases your metabolism, whether you have a thyroid problem or not. Mm-hmm. He goes, I don't let my ladies use T3 because what it's going to do is it's going to help them burn fat, but it's also going to build their precious muscle. And we know with competing, you want to keep that lean muscle mass. You want to keep that beautiful athletic look. And then you want to burn the body fat only, not your muscle. He goes, I use T2 with my women because it only burns body fat. It does not attack their muscle. It does not cause muscle loss and muscle burning like T3 does. I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Like hearing that from someone that's been doing this for a long time. Like I said, the OG of biohacking. Yes, I have noticed that as well with my patients when I use T2 versus T3 or a little bit more T2 than T3. It just preserves lean muscle mass.
That's very interesting. So T2 improves basal metabolic rate and it burns your fat off and increases your energy. Are there no downsides to this seemingly magical hormone?
I can't find any. That's the thing. I keep scouring the literature. Obviously, I'm always looking for feedback from my clients that are using or just consumers using my product. I'm always looking for feedback. And I just can't find any. I mean, the only time that we might hear somebody say that they got a little bit too energized because they took it late in the day. It's not a stimulant, but because it is improving mitochondrial function and increasing ATP production, if you take it at 3 or 4, it might affect your sleep and your ability to just kind of calm down and chill out at night. But as of yet, I have not heard anything negative from it whatsoever.
Very interesting. Okay. And that's why you included in your thyroid fixer supplement to T2.
Yes. Yep. Okay. Absolutely. Yeah. The big long name is 3,5-diodo-L-thymine, but in a nutshell, it's T2. So that's what you're going to see on the label is the 3,5-diodo-L-thymine, along with L-tyrosine, which is also good for your thyroid, and cholecystyrcholine, which helps improve fat burning as well. So you stack that all together and you just get this like perfect little supplement for fat burning and improvement of energy and improvement of just mitochondrial function. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's great.
I love T2.
That's great. I can tell how nerded out and excited you are about T2. And I'm going to thank you for sending me a couple of bottles. Yeah, I'm going to try it out myself. I think I'm going to get a thermometer first so I can measure a few days of my temperature and then see what T2 and the supplement's doing. So I'm super excited to share my results back with you. Now, one other question before I get to your larger line. People talk about selenium, iodine, ferritin being important for thyroid health. Is it that you need more of those, or do you need to be in the middle of the range? And are all 3 of them important?
Yes, all 3 are important, and it's the Goldilocks effect. You don't want to be too high. I see so many, just probably like you see your customers and your listeners and followers taking boatloads of biotin. Yeah. I see mine taking boatloads of selenium. And what can occur from that is this high selenium, which then increases reverse T3. And, they take it because they read it on a blog or read a book or in a Facebook group, selenium. And then they just start pounding it like it's candy. And you have to find the balance with the minerals. You want to find that proper, I want people basically in the middle of the standard lab value range with selenium. Iodine is a little bit different. Every cell in your body does need iodine. When you first test for it, if you're not taking it, you most likely will be low. If you're not low, then okay, maybe you're getting enough iodine somehow, some way. But once you start taking it, you're going to be flagged high. And that doesn't necessarily mean to stop taking it or reduce your dose. It's just picking up in what's in your bloodstream now. So you have to look at each individual nutrient and mineral and really kind of balance it out, but never go way, way, way high with the selenium or even magnesium. I mean, you can overdo anything good you can overdo.
Totally. In the hair loss world, if you take too little or too much selenium, you lose hair. Same thing with iron. Too little and too much, you lose hair. So you got to be, as Dr. Amy said, you got to be in the Goldilocks zone. That's best for these conditions. Okay, so tell us how you help men and women with their thyroid. Where can they go? How can they find you? What does the process look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you said, you can go to my podcast, which you are a guest on as well, the Thyroid Fixer podcast. And that's on all podcast platforms. And you can go directly to my website at dramyhornaman.com. And that's where you'll find out more about me, working with me individually, where we can test for you, we can prescribe for you. We're in all 50 states now, so that's amazing. And we'll just get it all done. We'll get you optimized. And then, of course, the T2 that we talked about is in my product called the Thyroid Fixer. And you'll find that on my website too. You can go directly to the store at fixersupps.com. So that's FIXXRSUPPS.com. And that's where you'll find the entire line.
That's great. Love what you're doing, Dr. Amy. Love the podcast. It's very popular, by the way. So great job on building that and just focusing and targeting this such an important area that a lot of people are not doing so well. So great job on finding your niche and really owning it and doing such a good job. And then, of course, check out her website, dramyhornaman.com, and the link to the supplements directly. With that said, Dr. Amy, thank you. Oh, is there Instagram or Facebook that they should follow you on as well?
Oh, sure. You know, we're all over the social media. So Instagram is Dr. Amy Hornaman, and then YouTube, Dr. Amy Hornaman, and Facebook. I mean, just Google it and you'll find it. I do have a very unique Facebook group called Girl Fix Your Thyroid. And in there, so even if you're not quite ready to become a patient or you're not quite sure what's going on with you, jump in that group and post your labs, ask questions. I'm in there answering every single day. My team's in there. And then you just have a community of support. So we have really knowledgeable, sometimes they're patients that have already gone through my program and they're optimized. They're in there answering your questions too. So you can get a lot of feedback about what's going on with you and what to do in terms of the next steps as well from that group. So that's Girl Fix Your Thyroid on Facebook.
Awesome. And last thing I'll say is my litmus test for listening to somebody talking about something is, do they look the part or not? And Dr. Amy totally looks the part. So thank you for coming on the Anti-Aging Hacks Show. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.